Hi, I'm David Petersen, the creator of Mouse Guard, and welcome to Creator Commentary for the Mouse Guard short story collection, Baldwin the Brave and Other Tales. This episode will cover the first story in the collection, The Wise Weaver. Please follow along in your copy of the story as I talk about the behind-the-scenes details, art notes, and my headspace as I go page by page and panel by panel. I will share behind-the-scenes images when I can. Also, a fair warning, there will be lots of spoilers if you have not yet read this volume or the rest of the Mouse Guard series. The Wise Weaver was originally published as a free comic book day story in 2011. It was my second attempt at one of these free short stories. The first one, which I later used as the prologue to the Black Axe, I didn't think worked very well for new readers of Mouse Guard. So for this free comic book day attempt, I wanted something that felt more like a fable or a folktale. The goal was to make a story that would work for new readers, but also reward longtime fans with some new information or an Easter egg, which became part of the structure for my free comic book day stories, to have a mouse we know from the main book series as a younger mouse, being told a morality tale that specifically shapes who they become. The tale of the Wise Weaver draws on the tenets of the Guard to use the sword, shield, and wisdom, in this case trickery, together. I borrowed the circular structure from Rock, Paper, Scissors and Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale. Cover image. The cover art was completed while I was still working on the story because Archaea needed it to turn in for solicitation. After making the composition of the mouse, hawk, snake, and crab, while still leaving room for the Mouse Guard logo and a box at the bottom where stores could stamp or sticker their location info, the art looked a bit bare to me. So I altered the design of an existing stained glass window pattern by adding in icons of the sword, poison, and shield. The compass rose on the rock was an afterthought to make sure that the image looked more interesting and to signify the idea of a region being beset by predators. The story had a set limit of 8 pages, and I planned out that page 1 to be both the young mouse and the intro to the story, and then 1 page for each of the 3 predators to give their gifts, and then 1 page for each of them to meet their demise, which leaves a final page for the moral of the story. Title illustration. This was illustrated years after the story was first published, so that it would fit better with facing pages for the hardcover collection. Luckily, I had a clear version of the window design from the cover to reference, and I played with some typeface to make it feel ye olde worldy. Page 1. Panel 1. With Kenzie being the young mouse hearing this tale, it means we learn more about his upbringing. Jesse Glenn, the real-life inspiration for Kenzie, has a father named Alfred, and in fact he was our scoutmaster in the Boy Scouts. The spelling of his name and the location of Willow Root were already established for Kenzie's past in the role-playing game. Alfred is honing the blade of a familiar sword to Mouse Guard fans. It's Lucas's sword, which Alfred forged and gifted with the towns around Willow Root in appreciation to the guard mouse Lucas. Kenzie having an interest in swords at the start here is counter to how we know him in the main series, and sets up the turn for the moral of the tale. Panel 2. The map was the quickest way to explain what's being said about this town's lore of being surrounded and cut off by the 3 predators. 2 of the predators were picked for their bodies, providing the gifts later in the story. But the hawk could have just as easily been a fox or a badger. I think I used it to make up for my initial plans for a hawk or a pair of hawks being the predator in winter that were eventually replaced by an owl. This map also breaks up the visuals from the panels of mice talking with something a little bit more graphical. Panel 3. The Wise Weaver steps forward. I believe I had him as a weaver because it's both an unassuming trade to be the slayer of beasts while also being a nod to the brave little tailor. His clothes are meant to have details that indicate a fancy or distinctive weave or embroidery to denote his trade. The silhouettes behind him are reminiscent to the ones I did in Fall Issue 3, when Saxon and Kenzie draw a crowd as they duel. Page 2, Panel 1. In my notes for the story, I wrote that this panel could either be a close-up of the mouse bowing, where we wouldn't see much of the hawk, or a pulled-back view with a tiny mouse showing more of the size and majesty of the bird. I think I went with a tighter version of this panel because of the narration mentioning his bowing, and that would be easier to read visually closer in on the mouse. Panel 2. My notes for this story mentioned to use whatever the unused option was for the visual from panel 1. I also note that this is a lot more detail in the ground cover than I'd done in either fall or winter. Panel 3. I hope fans understand that this is a fairy tale, because otherwise the reality of the hawk, and later the crab, ripping a piece of their bodies off and passing them over to the mouse is pretty horrific. I'm still proud of the body language on the wise weaver as he leans away from the gift, as he still reaches for it, untrusting of the hawk. Page 3. This page's panel layout is a mirror image of the previous one. Panel 1. As I penciled this page, I used photos that I still had of me posing a crab that Julia and I got from a local fishmonger back when I was drawing all the crabs at Calagero in fall issue 2. Looking at this now, I think I left too much negative space in the sand area. I could have filled that up with more rocks or grasses, but I know I did have lots of space to fill with that narration box. Panel 2. This top-down view was to switch up the visual of him kneeling the same way he was with the hawk on the previous page. I also did my best in this dialogue to make it clear what he's saying without being too repetitive from his plea to the hawk. Panel 3. My regret with this panel is how the crab's claw matches up too perfectly with the shape of his claw in panel 2. But it's a way that was totally by accident and also doesn't make any anatomical sense. I do like that the diagonal shape that tangent forms draws your eye down and through the claw to the mouse's face, then diagonally back with the shell piece all the way over to the narration. Page 4. For the snake's scene of sacrifice, I thought it would be visually fitting for those panels to all be horizontal. Panel 1. Hiding the snake in grass seemed like both a great visual for the scale and drama of a mouse approaching a slithering predator, but also it was a lot less snake to draw, especially with so much of him getting covered up with the narration box. The narration box does the heavy lifting of reiterating the bargain this time. Panel 2, which leaves his dialogue just to sum it up. I also wanted this panel to establish his carrying the claw and talon, like a warrior would a sheathed sword and shield slung over his shoulder. I'm not sure what species of snake I was looking at here, but it's certainly something different than the black rat snake of fall issue 1. Panel 3. Even though it's a different vibe overall, drawing this I was thinking of when the Skeksis are getting vital essence from the podlings in glass vials in the movie The Dark Crystal. The background is a rare occasion where I made the grass shapes of color rather than establishing those as lines in ink. Page 5. Panel 1. I wanted an establishing shot of the wise weaver now fully armed before going to the next panel for a kill shot. I also wanted that beat where the crab is unaware of the treachery, but the audience sees what's coming. I prefer what I did here with the horizon line and the sand to the first crab page. Panel 2. Ouch. That unshelled flesh looks so raw and painful. I approximated what the inside of the crab's muscle would look like and colored it that light violet to make it stand out as raw. The talon represents the sword, the attack portion of the 3 tenants of the guard. This is also the first step in the circle of this particular rock, paper, scissors. Hawk beats crab. Panel 3. I think this bird's eye view pulled back so far was to make sure that the crab and mouse were at a very different angle and scale than what they had been in the previous 2 panels, just to give visual variety to the page. It also gave me room for the weaver's steps to lead us off and into the next page. Page 6, Panel 1. It was nice to do a vertical panel here, to play with the snake looming over the weaver to strike. Panel 2. This page breaks with the 3-panel arrangement in the rest of this story, which is for this panel where I needed an extra beat between the mouse arriving and landing a killing blow. I wanted it clear that he detached himself from the shield so as not to get pulled into the venomous maw. I took a photo of my hand unbuckling a belt and held it in my other hand as a reference to get this image. Panel 3. I really wanted that jaw unhinged to look like he's really choking and struggling. The second killing object is obviously the shield tenant of the guard. Panel 4. Crab beats snake. The narration is doing some of the hard work, though, by explaining just how that shell piece would result in death. It was important for me to show the Weaver now with only the poison vial tied to his sash. Page 7, Panel 1. Back to our 3-panel layout with an establishing shot of the mouse returning to the hawk. This time, though, he doesn't need to worry about the hawk suspecting anything, because he has done as he promised, to kill the other 2 predators. Panel 2. This means of death is a direct result of the end of Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale. And this move of the mouse's is meant to be the wisdom of the guard, a trick the hawk never saw coming. The fact that the hawk doesn't have hands and the mouse has to pour it for him also explains away why they are not toasting and drinking together simultaneously. Panel 3. Snake beats hawk. Our rock, paper, scissors circle is complete. I really like how we just see the back of the Weaver as he walks away from us and into lore. No celebration, no fanfare, no gloating. He just did what he said he would do for his town and wandered right out of the story. Page 8, Panel 1. I wanted Kenzie to have a humble bed. While Alfred Smithy might be doing okay, they don't live extravagantly. You can see the backside of the forge chimney behind Alfred, signaling that Kenzie sleeps not in a bedroom of his own with any privacy, but tucked away in his father's workshop where it's warm. Kenzie's dad explains to him while all 3 tenants were useful, sword, shield, and wisdom, it was the cleverness of the Weaver to use them together, making this moral perfect for Kenzie, who later represents wisdom as a patrol leader over Saxon's sword and Rand's shield. Panel 2. Beyond wanting a tender scene after such a violent story, I also wanted this dialogue to drive home the point that wisdom and smarts don't always have to be used for destruction. Panel 3. We know we're outside of Alfred's smithy here with the cues of the thatched roof and the subtle silhouette of Alfred through the glass, something I achieved by copying the color layers from the previous panel of him and pasting them here and turning down the opacity. The stained glass is the only real indication that Alfred may have had more means than the rest of the house suggests. But really, this was here because it was a way to tie in the cover art to the rest of the story. And so that it means that this idea of sword, shield, and wisdom was designed into a window that Kenzie slept under every night as a child. And that's the first story from Mouseguard, Baldwin the Brave, and Other Tales. It is a hardcover published by Archaea and available where books are sold. If you've enjoyed this commentary, please leave your comments below. Let me know what I didn't answer for you, and subscribe for updates and more videos. Thank you for listening.